Sheer possibility. The 15th of September 2024. There are things that are not supposed to be known by humans, yet I would actually ask to know them. If you want to do it like that, why are you giving me an option? This is done to a folder which contains my university documents. Then I try to dodge questioning by saying that it is not done in the sense that it has ended. No one really finishes studying. It is more of like I have finished using it. Rounding up conclusions has to be a good thing, especially if it is done with constant attention paid to self-awareness, the topic I'm concerned about. Does it all come back to the way we believe things to be, or to the actual thing itself as to how it was created and for what purpose it was made? Trying to find out most important things is truly similar to being forced to climb up an invisible pathway towards heaven, as though to make himself become delusional that he is making progress. That verse itself is a remarkable observation about knowledge and seeking knowledge. It is necessary that knowledge never be capable of being put into words, especially due to the fact that even dreams need to be forgotten rather than told. It is like saying, I do not only see the sign, realize the sign, and admit to its significant existence and necessary truth. It is also living the experience and knowing it to be true, even if knowledge was only contained within the dream world. It is like calling out, knowing that no one would answer unless permitted to. It is like knowing that people are not in control, not only of their faith, but also in their manners. Having no control over your manners is like being able to, step by step, constantly picking up the most important thing to say, write, do, or permit. Such incidents, if meant to be educational, will be put to reap benefit, will be able to reap benefit. If they were allowed to happen to cause destruction, as in the case of a rule of numbers that only applies within certain switch cases, ideas of programmatically attempt to either guide or affect the conversation. If they were meant to prove something that is already known, what difference would it make to have them happen? Yes, there are still more and more options to choose from. If experience is all that matters, then what do we do with the knowledge if we are not willing to bring anyone to testify? If we know that it will only be the only testifier who would matter in the situation, what would bring others to testify or witness do? Now it is made to seem as though it will be a matter of whether an escape route is available. Speaking out of the grave would be a necessary, definable metaphor. It will be considered a metaphor. Since the person had lost contact with the outside world, no television, no internet, no telephone, and possibly no light, then it seems as though speaking from there would be a source of discomfort. Take vampires, for example. They would have had retained all the culture, habits, and knowledge of previous generations that they had lived through. In most cases, people of our generation would consider the long lifespan of vampires. They are not immortal because they can be killed or caused to die. I would ridicule the conversation by saying that it is probable that a vampire's house roof, if he doesn't live in a mansion, if mansions are still inhabited by people of our generation, his house roof would certainly be probable to collapse, maybe with him sleeping underneath it, causing a wooden stick from the roof to fall down on his heart and pierce it through, making the vampire still eliminatable by the notion of probability. Similarly, vampires who had been asleep since they were mutated into vampires would only perceive the world in a lens that is adapted to viewing the world around them at that time in the past. There was a movie called The Old Guard, where a woman would join a league of old guard members who are destined to save the world by their being unkillable by human weaponry. People who had lived in a timeline which is different to ours would not be able to perceive the world as we perceive it in our world, and there's a reason for that. People who lived through that period in time would be affected not only by the living standards and social exchanges they have, but also through the air they breathe and the way of communication they use. If people's thoughts are based upon what goes on around the world due to chaos theory, then it is very likely that this was the case in that time. In other words, if people from the past were made to disappear and then reappear later in time as though in a different timeline, it would be very logical to think that those who did travel through time towards the future have been given too many options to choose from the pool of answers for how would you want to have changed the world in order to reach the point you are at that moment. It is like asking which unlikely scenario would you have happened to the world so that you are given the opportunity or the choice to go back in time and do what you did. In Doctor Strange's theory of the multiverse, the girl was given the chance and the ability to travel through space-time, bending space-time logic and quantum reasoning as we know it to result in multiple parallel universes where there is a character called Doctor Strange, and he is necessarily either a villain or a hero. In this multiverse theory, it was very abhorring to realize that it is only due to Doctor Strange's double character that the movie unfolds. He claims to be able to meet his identical self in one of those worlds, where he would have the grimoire in his possession, but he had been using it for evil rather than good. While my focus and attention continues to drift towards the girl and her ability to jump between timelines, which I find very interesting and profitable, the girl, in this sense, is not considered the cause of chaos, the hated world. She was instead the cause of returning stability to it. In this movie, however, the author does not only explain how a land like Valhalla would be caused to happen, it showed that it is a logically right option to happen. It is only through being able to communicate with the other parallel worlds that a character would be able to set things right in their world. The world with the absence of the girl would have been a most rational explanation to the world. By being born, she caused the world to be possible to entangle. If she can jump between worlds, she would be able to move things around with her. Yet, I still interrupt my train of thoughts by wondering what it would be like for someone like her who would have such an ability. The movie goes on to explain the storyline of a separate woman who was shown to be the evil side of the story, when in fact she resembles the reason for the story's significance. In one of her alternate universes, she is a mother of a young girl. In her original timeline, she had dreams of having a child, but never did. It is as though it was a decision made by another person, or that she had an accident which would leave her childless for the rest of her life. But she wanted the child. She dreamt of having a child and had actual dreams of it. How happy she would be with the child, how happy the child would be with her. However, it turns out in the plot of the movie and relying on other theories from movies based on quantum reasoning that people only get dreams because in some other world they are what the dream tells them. If you incept someone to believe something wrong, then you essentially are creating chaos. الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله. Dreams are gifts from God, and it is not the movie's right to allude to something else. It is like throwing the blame at someone who would definitely either be prone to punishment caused by you or deserving of the punishment he had already wrought. It is not throwing blame, it is highlighting the effect of knowledge, conception, perception, understanding, and reasoning. When it comes to the woman who had always wished and were shown dreams of having a child, she sought other methods to make that happen, to change the world around her, to change her fate, and to be able to tear the timeline, creating a portal for travel. When she makes it to the other timeline where she would have had a child, the child identifies her. It is not only a single dream cycle, it is instead a cycle that ties both universes together to begin with. The child had already seen the woman, possibly in dreams, where she would feel scared and would scream out of fear having had a nightmare. When she would wake up, she would tell her mother about the dream and tell her that she had seen the witch in the dream. In a dream, claiming to be her mother. So the woman who makes the tear in the timeline is called the witch, which resembles how the woman who is called a stranger by the child is perceived. Anyone who is not the mother doesn't speak like the mother, doesn't give the same feeling a mother gives, is a stranger, and if they claim to be the mother for looking like the mother, then they are a witch. After having the dreams with her child from the other timeline, the witch was in a state of rage, envy, and destructiveness, that she wanted to go there and take the place of the mother. When she had the encounter with the child, where the child called her a witch, she revealed a satisfaction with her world and timeline. Had she not attempted to communicate with her child from the other timeline, the child that she never had in her original timeline, she would not have felt like an undesirable existence that she felt like when she was called a witch. She, therefore, goes back to her timeline and sacrifices her own self to keep the grimoire protected. It is like a sacrifice to hold Valhalla back together. She would already identify her own world to be a destructive world, that everything that happens to her and all the struggle that she had gone throughout her life was to attempt to claim motherhood of a child who was not destined to be born in her world. Quantumly, this is equivalent to a branch of a tree that we would want to discontinue and take one of the infinite amount of other branches. It is like not wanting to know the reason for the event not happening in our lives, i.e., having a child, but wanting it to happen nevertheless. The witch wanted a child. She traveled to a parallel universe to have the child, as though she would be able to see herself from the other universes. It is like saying that two of the same consciousnesses were present in the same timeline. They have to be opposite to one another and they cannot exist in the same timeline. If they did, one has to eliminate the other. When the Flash traveled to his past using his very fast movement forward, causing him to split the space-time bubble, he was able to travel back in time. In other words, it is very interesting how that seems like a gap in our understanding. If we can actually freeze time or slow it down to a small speed, then we would be able to go back in time. It is a contradiction of the principles of abiding by time. If the Flash was able to slow down time, it means that he cannot stop time, let alone rewind it. It is only by claiming that by running at very high speeds that a tear in the timeline would appear. When the witch was able to cause a tear in the timeline by using her grimoire, the Flash established that it is done by relying on physics in the quantum sense. There is no significant evidence that supports the theory that at high speeds we would be able to cause a tear in the timeline of the multiverse. If the multiverse is actually the theory that we have parallel universes, then it is very idiotic that we would be sending people through the tear in the timeline. It is unfortunately the case that causing a tear in the timeline is still a possibility. However, whether it is a probability is unknown. It is actually probable if we consider the idea that the continuous creation and uncreation of worlds, especially the easy task of making worlds out of sheer probabilities, indicates the greatness of the design of the world as we know and perceive it. It is without doubt that this world has a creator and that everything that happens in the world is in fact a notion of continuous creation. Even the concept of slowing down time can be perceived as a travel through space perception. By reaching certain speeds, the Flash was able to tear a gap through the timeline, connecting all possible outcomes of a single event into a bind. In essence, taking control of the outcomes as they all collide, giving him the opportunity and the chance to decide his own destiny. In so doing, the more he does it, the more it becomes deterministic, but through his own forced will unto the universe. However, with the presence of two consciousnesses at the same time of the same person, they are essentially removing the consciousness that came from the future. When the Flash saw himself from the future, his future copy would have to begin removing itself from existence entirely on a very counterproductive way. The moment they see each other, the older self should start to realize and rationalize that had I seen myself on that day in the past, I would not have filled in the gap in such a way that seeing oneself in the past would cause one to start eliminating from their consciousness the events from the past because of their unlikeliness to have happened. At the very least, people should also think about the limits of their memories. If someone does not remember that something had happened, for example, seeing themselves from the future, then it means that the event had not happened. In such a way, if people were able to travel in time, they would all travel back in time trying to fix a mistake that they had made, which caused them to have a split. If people do travel back in time, it would be to do good instead of bad, or to do what they think is good instead of what they perceive to be bad. In many movies that speak about time travel, it is through time travel that they were able to live their lives. It is like the concept of time travel itself is made like a pool of sheer possibilities.